Welcome to today's episode.
Hey, welcome to week 3 of DP Deconstruct. Week 3, episode 3.
Episode 3.
Episode 3.
Same thing.
All right. Whatever. All things lenses. Not all things. Some things lenses.
We're going to cover some things lenses today.
Yeah, so let's talk about lenses.
All right. So, I think the most important thing to talk about with lenses is what makes up a lens. What are important characteristics of a lens to look for.
Sure.
So the main things that I think people look at, we'll get a little deeper when I'm asking you questions later. But the main things I think people are looking at when they're talking about lenses is focal length and aperture.
For the most part, yeah.
I mean, at a basic level,
sure,
right?
Basic level.
So
those are the main characteristics of determines what class of lens or whatever you're looking at. Sure.
Right. So when you're looking for aperture, or if you're looking for a quality lens, why does aperture even make a difference?
So aperture, I mean, there's in cinema lenses, it's called an iris, and it's a perfect example. If you think about your own pupil in your eye or your iris in your eye, it's what allows more light or less light. When it's darker outside, your pupil opens up and is wider. When there's your bright sunshine, and you see that's really dark, right? And so that's exactly what this is doing. And so the lower the number, so an aperture or an f-stop or a t-stop of 1.4 is going to be wider open than an aperture of or f-stop of f22, and that's going to be less. And that's basically what it's doing is letting in more or less light. The more light that it lets in, the shallower depth of field. That focal length is gonna be much shorter. Where the larger that number, the smaller that closure. F22 is gonna be, everything's gonna be much more focused.
Right.
And it actually is the exact same thing. And ultimately, it's exposing the film or the sensor itself. And so that's really what aperture is.
Okay. And I think we'll get into focal length a little bit later, but there's another aspect of this. And guys, I like lenses. I enjoy lenses. But Matt is a true fanatic about lenses. And this is where I would say we both have a good understanding of video, and there's things that that I probably know a little bit more about, and there's things that Matt knows a lot more about. And I would say on most things, I focus more on technical, but when it comes to gear,
I love
lenses especially. Yeah. Matt is going to be the expert. So I'm kind of going to be interviewing Matt and asking Matt questions because there's some things that he knows about lenses that I just don't understand as much as he does. And so why don't we get into elements, blades,
sure,
why it's important.
And by no means do we want to get too deep and confuse anybody. I'm just going to keep picking up this lens because it's right here. But for this lens, this is a Zeiss Sony 1.4. It's actually, if I had to say my favorite lens, this is probably it. It's very unique. I love G Master lenses, but this lens right here is what every G Master was ever made off of. So it's a very unique lens, but I love how contrasty it is. I love how sharp it is. I mean, at 1.4, this lens is super sharp, and it looks so unique and good. And every time I use it, people are like, "Oh my gosh, like that shot! You're such a good photographer." I'm like, like lenses, like invest in lenses, right? And so, with that being said, is this specific lens right here has 12 elements, meaning, and what that means is inside this lens is 12 different separate components that move, that actually focus that light, and each one of them is super high glass. I mean, Zeiss is known for the quality of glass they are. And so it has, 12 different elements of glass to sharpen that light. And that's ultimately what's producing the image. Right. And so all of those parts work together to have the light come through. And if you're using, lower end parts, you're going to have a lower end result. And when I say that, like, it doesn't always mean dollars. It literally means quality of what they're using. Right. That starts at the front element of this lens, all the coatings, all of the things to help disperse light or reflect light, and then ultimately focusing all those pieces and how they work together.
It's really amazing, the science. So I had on my 70 to 200, I broke the front element off last fall, and
that's
don't ever do that.
That's actually why it's sitting there.
That's why it's not on. Yeah, because it's not fixed.
Yeah.
It's patched.
Yeah.
Don't ever do that because even Sony won't fix it, from my understanding. The guy that sent this
If
said
you're a
that
Sony person, invest in pro support. That's all I would say.
even then I was told it wouldn't do it.
It'd be amazing.
Yeah. But anyway, I broke it off, and to even be able to patch it, he had to pull every piece out from the back, which is just mind blowing to me. But the science that goes into these lenses.
Oh man, and that's why you get what you pay for, you know, type of deal. And so yeah, inside of there, imagine 12 pieces of glass and different elements and groups. I think this thing has 10 different groups inside. 12. So 12 elements, 10 groups. Like I can't even explain that fully to you. But I would also say to you, like, with that piece, so that piece that makes the iris we just talked about,
right?
How many blades is in that is actually how round the bokeh is. And bokeh is the blurred light, or the round. So
like if you have practical lights in the background, like the little Edison bulbs or Christmas lights, is it round?
The
or is
more
it...
blades you have, let's say you have 14 blades, that's going to be rounder than a 9-bladed lens. And so that actually, then it starts looking more like an octagon, or you can see sharp lines. And so the rounder that is, the more blades that are in it, and the finer the blades are. And so like all of those things is what produces the image. And so that's a lot of nerdy tech, but that's what's inside of your lens.
Well, and even flare is affected by quality, obviously focal length, and then
we'll get into it later, but like Zeiss's highest end lenses are their Supreme Primes with the radiant coating. You pay literally like, I don't even know, $6,000 for that coating, and the coating just does this beautiful, like dreamy look to the light. And man, I'm telling you, there's not another lens like them. And so it really gives the characteristic of the actual lens itself. And that's what makes it, in my opinion, a great lens. Yeah.
Okay. So from there, now that we've talked about what makes up a lens, do you want to go with...
Well, did we talk about focal length?
No, because I figured we'd talk about that. We need to start talking about that now.
Well, you just mentioned the two characteristics are aperture and focal length.
Yeah.
And
let's talk about what focal length is.
Yeah, what really simply put is the smaller the millimeter, the wider the lens. So a 14 or 16 mil lens is going to be much wider than a 50 mil, 85, 100, whatever. And so the larger the number, the more tight that lens is, the smaller that number, the wider it is. So
right, and there's characteristics for each one. And a lot of times you can almost tell what focal length is being used, no matter how wide the shot is, by characteristics of each
there's
focal
definitely
length.
times when not to use or when to use based on what the characteristics of that focal length will do. And we can chat about that later.
And I think we will. And I don't know, like, I guess, do you want to go on primes versus zoom lenses?
Let's do it.
Okay, so this is... Guys, this is a topic. You're going to see us smirking. We might throw down. I don't know. We'll see where it goes. But Matt and I consistently have a debate. I would say a debate. It's not an argument. It's a debate about if.
Well, you shared a quote with me earlier. Why don't you share that first?
A jack of all trades is a master of...
the one about Roger Deakins' quote.
That's not a quote. That's what he says. So Roger Deakins
100% quote.
Roger Deakins is arguably the best DP of all time.
I would say so, yeah.
Arguably.
I mean,
and he said that a DP, that zoom lenses are made for lazy DPs.
Yes. Yeah. And he and I would agree.
And I would most times agree with that.
Sure.
So Matt and I don't disagree.
Yeah. We're acting like this because we literally argued over text message for like 30 minutes about
last week
zoom lenses.
Yeah. So I did a story not long ago, and it was asked me questions because I was on a long road trip and I was bored out of my mind.
Oh, yes. That's where this all started.
Yeah. And so I got asked, what's your favorite lens and what's the lens that you use the most? And my favorite lens...
Which is funny because that's your newest lens.
Right. And it would be between these two.
Sure.
Are my favorite. But I would say that my favorite is probably the Sony 35 mil G14. F14. G Master F14.
I knew what you were saying.
But my most it wasn't most used. All around workhorse was what it was asked. And my all around most like versatile lens, workhorse lens, is always probably going to be a 24-70 G Master 2.8. And when Matt saw my answer, I'm pretty sure that he was in the hospital for the next day because he had a coronary. Like he started throwing me emojis, like throwing up. And
well, first I want to preface, like I've owned this lens, literally this exact lens. I've owned it in Canon. I've owned it in Sigma.
You own the series, the series 1 and 2 in Canon.
Yeah,
and did you own the
I owned
G
the
Master?
G Master.
For like a day?
I returned it, and I owned
The 28-75.
Yeah, the Tamron,
which is basically the same
actually a cool lens in itself, but it's unique and not because of focal length. Anyway, and I say that because I've returned them and I've sold them lots, and I've just come to find I don't enjoy what I get out of it.
And I will say this. The reason that Matt will always return pretty much any zoom lens that's not a long lens is because your style of shooting and what jobs you're typically working on.
Sure.
Right? You typically work on more of our corporate work. Like
Correct.
I would say if
that's not, I mean, we both work on
right, but
on all of them, but
sure. If only one of us goes to a shoot, typically I'm going to go to most of the outdoor shoots, and you're going to go to most of the corporate shoots. If it's only a one person job, and that's just the way it works out. I think kind of our connections are more one side versus the other, and so your style of work that you're typically going, if you're the single shooter for the shoot, requires prime lenses.
Sure.
On mine, there are shoots that almost require.
Sure. That's where I would say, like, you asked me like a while back, so when would you use a zoom lens over, like, and this is not regarding the 70-200. That's one of my favorite lenses, and it's very unique.
That's not really fair. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's a beautiful.
We're talking that 16-35, 24-70. Like, when would you use that? Right.
And my answer to you was never. Like, I'll go straight up back up, or I'll run. I don't care if it doesn't. And he's like, well, you've never been in a tree stand, or you haven't, and I'm like, still, I would figure it out.
Not that you never, but you've never had to produce a TV show out of a tree stand.
Or whatever. And so, and that's where, if I had to answer the question, like, I'm actually facing this right now. Like, there's a long trip that I can go on, and it's going to be very, what I can bring. And so I'm like, do I want this quality and dynamics, or do I want the versatility? And I think that's what it boils down to is I believe that lens choices are based off of that exactly. Like, what is the scenario that you're shooting in? And most of the time I will always choose dynamic and quality over versatility, because I always love what that produces. Like, 50 mil from this lens and 50 mil from this lens are two different feels based on the characteristics of the lenses. And that's why I would say that. Now, we shoot a lot for, different corporate events, or I don't know, corporate, but like almost documentary style things. And so I was shooting for, like a Wounded Warriors project, and it was really fast. I had to follow them. I didn't know where I would be standing. We're courtside at a college basketball game, and you have to be pretty versatile of going, okay, I need a wide shot to make sure that I can show everybody in the party, show the atmosphere, show, what's going on. And then I needed to be able to really quickly get in and be able to see what's going on and the details of the actual story. And so that's where I would say I was the only person on that shoot. And so anyway, that's where I would say I would use a zoom lens over a prime lens, but it'd be very, very, very few.
Right. And where I would say that I would use this lens specifically, and why I said this is my workhorse, is because there's been many times in an outdoor TV setting where you have one lens that you can take.
This is also why I tell the outdoor industry needs to get with the times.
And I could not agree more. And so what's funny is when
I do. Versatility is important.
Well, and so I'm going to say this is probably going to sound bad, but if I'm working with a client who doesn't care right?
Sure.
I'm going to take this.
Okay.
If it's Matt and I and we're making a project and we're in the deer stand, I'm going to take this. I'm going to have it in a bag. And if I want to go wide, I'm going to put this lens on. If I want a little tighter, I'm going to switch. But a lot of people, let's talk deer hunting for a minute, okay? In the tree stand, there's not many hunters that are going to want to hear
that's a
moving. Like that doesn't work. And so you need to be able to get a variety of shots that you're going to want beyond being able to use a rocker arm. Like you're going to need to have.
Yeah, it's a little more, and it is a little more documentary style. So there's some forgiveness in that.
Outdoor, especially outdoor TV is really just reality TV based out of a tree stand.
Yeah, sure. And again, it's not to knock. There's versatility is extremely important. I'm just,
and that really is a variable of any kind of outdoor filming.
Yeah, and that goes for any documentary style as well. Sometimes versatility.
Adventure. Yeah.
So then the opposite of that is primes, and typically primes are sharper. Typically primes have a more dynamic look, and so if I can, and they're faster, meaning they have a wider aperture, allowing more light in, shallower depth of field, more separation of your subject to the background, it just looks more dynamic. And so, apparently I'm getting really excited. And so
he's really passionate about lenses, guys.
I think that's what's exciting to me though, is you're building a shot, and that's what a lens does. I think, we talked about it before, and you made an incredible point. You have a few of those, but like at the end of the day, for corporate work or for film work or feature work, typically you have more time. And so if you have more time and you can build a shot list and you can storyboard and you can make sure that you script, you can go, okay, hey, let's grab the 50 mil for this shot. Hey, let's, really establish the shot with the 24 mil. Let's go, really tight with the 90 mil and do some macro stuff. Like all of those things are going to be part as a DP. These are the decisions we're making. And so you have to, and so that's why I love lenses, is I feel like it helps you tell the story better.
Right. I feel like there's a big misunderstanding when it comes to lens choice. And I think this is where it's important to understand, and this is what we can get into more, is understand what lenses, what focal length, what different characteristics of lenses, what that does in a sequence. Right? I hear all the time, get a wide, medium, tight. Okay, why?
Yeah.
Like there's more to it than just make sure you have coverage. And right now, the film world, corporate, entertainment, outdoor, it's all about get coverage. Focal length.
Everything you do it with purpose.
Intention, right?
Intention.
Everything, every focal length, the reason you use it, it has there's an emotional connection to whatever focal length or whatever width, how much compression you're going to use, what aperture you're going to use. There's an emotional connection
real quick,
to
just
why.
because we're talking about, let's talk through that. I'm just going to grab a couple different lens choices here.
Two good ones.
We're going to grab this one because my nicer one. So I have a 20 mil, I have a 35 mil, I have a 50 mil, and I have let's just say this is 85 because for some reason we decided to stick all these lenses on cameras.
Lenses that we would actually want.
So we have a 85 over here. I would probably replace that with that, and 14 mil here. But let's just say like I have a 20 mil, a 35 mil, a 50 mil, and a 90 mil. And we can both answer this question, but like why would you use, not this specific lens, but like why would you use a super wide lens?
So there's two reasons why I would decide to use something like this.
Okay.
The first one and the most used is an establishing shot.
Correct.
Right. It tells you either, or else it can be like leaving out, but it basically just to show you the setting of where you're at. Okay. A lot of people use drones for the same reason. The other one I would do is to show isolation, right? It's not isolating a subject, but to show like loneliness or how
distance,
vast, right, or how vast an environment is.
This lens is naturally going to make you feel on the outside kind of looking in.
Right.
Right. And it's also going to, because of that reason, it's going to establish whatever that shot could be. Okay. So you said this is your favorite lens. Why?
So
somehow I'm interviewing you. How does this work?
Yeah. Wait a minute.
We'll flip the script on these other ones.
So 50 mil.
Well, no.
I understand. It answers.
You answer. You asked me these
50 mil.
two.
I will, but for me, 50 mil, and it just is. It's like the closest to what the eye actually sees, right? Okay. The 35 is very close to that. You get the same characteristics, but it's also a little bit more immersive, right? So the 50 mil can kind of, you can get that isolation of not being isolated, but the isolation of subject. Like it's a great coverage lens, right? The 35, it's like the world is still there, but one of Roger Deakins' favorites is 40 mil.
Yeah, his favorite two lenses are weird. 28 and 40
Right.
are the two top lenses for it. Like he can shoot the
Insane.
entire thing with those two lenses.
The film 1917,
Yeah.
the whole film, and granted, the whole film was shot as a one shot, so it makes sense to only have one lens, but the whole film was shot in a 40 mil.
Yeah. I mean, and again,
We're going to get on a squirrel, but the reason why I think this is the greatest lens, one, is super fast.
so it can still isolate, but there's also a little more.
Not isolate's not the right word. I use the wrong word. Separate from the background. You still get that separation, but it's still immersive like a 24 would be.
Yeah, it still allows a little bit of that atmosphere and
Right.
makes you.
So that's why I would go with this. So now, Mr. Turn the Scripts,
Okay.
go with 50. Why would you want to use
50 mil. This specific lens is my favorite. And again, this is the natural. You just answer the question. It's your natural what you see. You and I are talking right there. This is the closest millimeter, and so naturally your eye feels like it belongs there. It feels most natural, and I've used that word a couple times. But like the whole idea is like your brain, the feeling just feels right.
So when would you use that in a? Let's say we're building a scene for a film, right? I'm going to use this if I'm showing two people talking,
Okay.
right? And even if it's from the perspective of if I'm wanting to show like I am the person, right, who's talking, I'm going to go with this lens probably.
Sure.
And this would be isolation or to establish the scene of going into a room or whatever. When would you use a 50?
So a perfect example is this camera right here is using a 50. It's shooting over your shoulder.
Wait, we have cameras in here?
Wait, sorry, I'm not supposed to bring. But if that's the case, it almost is like you're part of the conversation. So it's very inviting. It makes you feel like you're immersed into the actual dialogue.
It is a very immersive.
Lens, and because it feels natural, you're naturally going to feel part of the conversation that we're having. Now, again, the camera that's not being used behind me is another 35 mil that is showing a little bit more of what's going on, and just that alone, again, makes you feel like invited in the room. If it was just super tight on your lips the entire time, that would be a very
weird,
unique and interesting choice. Or if it was so wide that you didn't feel like you were even part of this room, a lot of times you lose interest if you just stayed on that shot. And so I think that's what this does, is it's the most natural, and for that reason it just feels warm and it feels inviting. And so I like this lens a lot for just single camera shoots for if we're doing an interview and maybe it's a short interview or talking head, and we just want to, I love that lens. And every time we put it on our cameras, we're always like, oh yeah, that just looks right.
That's the one. Yeah.
That looks right. And I think that's why I like that.
I feel like if both of us ever are somewhere and we are on a shoot, it's either these two or the 50 and the 24.
Well, and
one of us has a 24, one of us has a 35, whatever. And the other one has a 50. And whoever has the 24 or the 35 is always jealous of the one with the 50.
Yep.
Every single time.
Every time.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I feel the same way. Like, this is really where it's like the fear of missing out. That's why I have to carry all the lenses all the time, like type of deal. And then moving on to the 90 mil or 85 mil, whatever you want to do. Like, ultimately, this is, and I think, like I said, every lens is going to tell a story. This, man, you want to talk about details. Think about somebody nervous and you're wanting to show that emotion on their screen, like punching in to show their facial expressions or their eyes
or
blinking,
like a hand
or their
tapping,
hand tapping, or
it's a detail that's great for cutaways.
Yeah, and same thing for is let's just say we're doing a multicam shoot. Sometimes that tight shot just punches in enough that like almost draws you into the importance of what somebody's saying. And so I think, again, you can add drama, you can add just dynamics with your lens choice. And so, even this 90 mil specifically, we use this on a film that we just created, Restoring Dummies, and we've got all sorts of cool detail shots along with a probe lens that allowed us to do those same kind of unique shots. And the truth is man, that is part of the entire story that's being told. And we're just excited about that film because of those reasons. And we got to one camera shoot, and you and I were just dialoguing the whole time about what looked best. And a lot of times it was like, try this one. Ooh, I actually like that one better. Or let's back up a little bit and use this lens to make it more immersive, or
Right.
if that makes sense. And so that's what I would say. Now, with that being said, and I would encourage anybody, you will never use a lens you're not comfortable with. And so I own lots of lenses. And so I started a new thing where if I bought a 24 mil, and I'm not a super wide
Neither one of us are.
Yeah. And I basically forced myself to do fun passion shoots with just that lens for a week or two or whatever.
Well, you shot an entire wedding with the 24. And
Yeah.
like Matt's not typically a wedding shooter, but was for a friend. And so you shot the whole thing with a 24.
Outside of portraits, because I didn't want when we'll talk about distortion and some of those things, but like it just wasn't pleasant on the faces if you're getting close.
Yeah.
But pretty much I would say like 80% of the entire wedding, and I loved it. And it made me fall in love with that lens, and now I'm comfortable when I want to use it and why I want to use it. And I think that's ultimately what I would say, like when you get that, like own it, learn it, why to use it, when to use it. And that's ultimately, as a director of photography, you have to know those things. So,
Well, to add on to what you just said, it's kind of funny. So you talked about doing that with a 24. And so when I got my 35, I was like, that's a really good point. I should probably do that. And I did the same thing. I went on like 3 shoots, and I wanted to put the 50 on. I was like, no, I'm going to put the 35 on because I need to learn this lens
be
better.
careful doing it on paid gig where, your stubbornness could, but you're right. Yeah.
Right. And so I did that, and I was like, gosh, I like that. Gosh, I like that. Oh my gosh, I like that. And now it's my favorite lens.
Yeah.
And so, and typically like this side of the aisle, I was always like, I want compression.
Yeah. Well, and the same thing with the 14 mil. Like there's times where this is my least used lens, but there is times where that is the perfect lens for the job. We've shot some stuff for Winnebago and just did some stuff with Village Travel and some different things where like, if I didn't have this lens, like,
oh, you're in trouble.
Yeah. You called me and like, hey, I need this lens for this specific shoot and this, and like, there's a reason for those things. If you walk into, and you're supposed to be shooting this might be your favorite lens, but you're supposed to be shooting a car commercial or something, and the inside of the car is not going to look very inviting, like you're actually in the car.
Right.
If this is the lens choice you have, trying to shoot from the back.
If you're shooting dialogue in a car, great choice.
Yep.
If you're shooting the car, not a good choice. And one thing I'll say about the 14, and you mentioned the probe lens also, there are specialty lenses.
Yeah.
And the thing they're super cool, right? The 14, especially that 14, has such a good look, right? But if you shot everything, or if you put too much, you talked earlier about it, if we always shot on this whole thing was the wide shot, it'd get really boring really fast, right? If we had that probe lens, it's funny because we shot the probe, and we did a lot of the probe work first.
Yeah.
Right? Because they were the shots that we wanted to get.
I had to send it back. So
yeah. And so we went, and that was all the first B-roll that came into the timeline. And we're like, oh my gosh, this looks terrible. Because it was all
the
probe.
same. Yep.
And so we went back. We were planning on it anyway, but when we got back and we shot all the other B-roll to go with it, and we shot the other documentary stuff for the film,
That stuff
and we put it all in, it just added to it. And then it was like accessorizing the video almost, adding some pizzazz, as Matt
Who
likes to
uses
say.
that word?
I'll put a card up right here.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Watch this video. But it added a flair to the video that we wouldn't have had normally. But at first, if we would have used that probe lens too much, it would have been terrible.
It can ruin the film.
So again, lens choice is super important, and it's more than just get a wide, medium, tight for coverage. It's about understanding when and why you would want that certain focal length.
Well, and again, I would just say like gimbal work, typically a wider shot's going to help with movement sometimes, but then you can say the opposite for those different things.
Well, a wider lens on a gimbal is going to show a faster movement or more of a dynamic shot.
Yeah.
Whereas a tighter lens or like an 85, it's going to isolate. You're going to compress that background more, and it's going to be a slower movement, but it's going to really isolate.
Well, I'll just shout out right now. One of my favorite filmmakers or YouTubers of all time is Josh Yo. Like the
Without
guy
a doubt.
is
Make art
Josh
now.
O is a genius.
Yeah.
And man, I still inspired by everything that he does. And he decided to put a 400 mil lens on a gimbal, and you see it, and it instantly reminds you of like Nat Geo, you know.
Yeah,
and
you're just like, oh my gosh,
the
cheetah
just
running
like
in
the compression and bringing you in with the crazy like parallaxing in the background and all of that stuff, and it's just like, oh my gosh, you know, like most people aren't doing that, but the whole point is like, it's incredible how a lens choice and what it can make you feel and how it can, you know,
it really is.
The right lens choice and the wrong lens choice
can ruin.
You know, yeah,
it can make or break the
Story
way
is important.
the way a sequence or a film in general looks. And I do think it's important to say that if you shot your whole film with a 50, or you shot your whole film with 35, is one right and one wrong?
No,
not at all. Right?
I mean, obviously, right. Or you just said a 40 mil for the entire, what
1917.
film? 1917.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and like that's, I guess what I'm getting at. There's a lot of opinion when
Yeah.
it comes to it, and just understand.
Alfred Hitchcock was a perfect example of that. Like all of the movement and different things that he did was breaking all these rules, but it's also why it was such a unique way to tell story.
Right.
And now people use those techniques all the time.
Right. And yeah, and every famous DP is famous because they have a look, right? And that look typically is created by focal length and movement. Typically, then you do have symmetry and all that kind of stuff. But like, I would say the two biggest determining factors are movement and focal length of a lens.
Yeah. Let's can we
go
talk about photo and video lenses and what makes what?
Yeah.
So tell us what those are. I keep taking over the interview, and so I'm trying to like, how do I do this?
Okay, so why don't you talk about what are the biggest difference? We don't have a cinema camera or a cinema lens on. We don't have a cinema lens on the table. But say the biggest. Why would someone pick a cinema lens over a photo lens for filming for video?
Well, I've been in photography for a long time, so it used to be everything was manual focus. But the first one I would say right away, typically, photo lenses usually autofocus, where cinema lenses they're all manual focus outside of servo lenses. But cinema lenses are typically way more robust. They're manual and they have just a build quality to them. But ultimately, there's a couple different things that really set them apart. And one of those is focus breathing. If you've ever looked at a lens, and maybe we can find some footage.
That lens in particular.
Yeah. So this is the 35, which we love. And one of the reasons that I was a little hesitant on buying this lens is all the reviews of going, man, the focus breathing's awful. Well, thankfully that some of these new cameras have something called focus breathing compensation. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But basically, anytime that you focus, so if I'm rack focusing from this microphone to this microphone or whatever, like you're seeing the actual, almost like the distance of the lens changing, the framing of the lens changing just a little bit. It's either a little tighter or a little wider.
Yeah, it's typically going to be seen on the edges of the
on the edges of the thing. So a cinema lens, a true cinema lens, is going to have far less, if almost no, focus breathing that you can't. So it's less distracting. If we rack focus from me to you and drawing that in, you're not like, oh, something just changed. You're really just your eyes drawn to that focal point. And so
and it's funny on the way here, I'm notorious for watching videos while I'm driving.
So bad.
On the way here, I was watching All Quiet on the Western Front, and there was this rack focus. The soldier was walking up the hill, and he looked back, and there was another dead soldier. And that rack focus was so smooth.
Money.
I was like,
and that's a characteristic of a high end. A lot of these cheaper cinema lenses that you're seeing on the market have some of the worst focus breathing ever. And so that would be one of the main characteristics of a cinema lens compared to a photo lens. Photo lenses don't care because they're photo. And again, that's why some of these new cameras are coming out with, and it's basically doing a like almost like digital like adjustment punch in to where you don't see it, and so it's just so smooth that it's butter,
Right.
And it's incredible. I use it all the time.
Yeah,
it changes
never
a
off,
little bit of the
honestly.
focal length, but I'd rather have that than
fine.
have that.
You
And
like 1%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and even if your camera misses for just a second, you just don't notice it much because all of a sudden it's not jumping all over the place.
Where especially with the 35 in the past or with certain cameras, the A1 still doesn't have focus breathing compensation.
There's supposed to be a firmware update, and I'm
but
hoping.
even now, if we were to turn it on, you can, if it's trying to catch focus and it's like, let's say it's on your face and that rack behind you, it's like,
oh yeah,
and it's so
distracting. And so another one of the characteristics of a photo lens to a cinema lens is back in the old days when everything was manual and there's manual focus and manual apertures, there's a click. And so this lens specifically has you can hear the click and you can actually feel the aperture changing. So if I go from 1.4 to 2, you can feel the 3 clicks to get there, right? And so it's kind of nice to actually feel that if you want to feel it in your hands. Not every lens has that now because you can change it in your camera.
Right.
But that's what a click is. Well, a cinema lens will always have a D-click, and this specific lens has, you can see that it says on or off click. And I don't know if you can see that on any camera. But anyway, if I hit this off and now I turn this, ooh, smooth. Aaron needs to clean his lenses, but you can hear that it's not clicking anymore. And so it's very smooth. So let's just say, sorry, I got him way off. It's getting better. So anyway,
must have been.
So what happens is now that if I in real time, I can do that and just slowly shut that iris, and you're not distracted by the clicks, and so there you don't see the steps.
And it's smoother.
Yeah, it's just smoother. So
unless you have a rock in it like I did,
that's another version. And so a lot of times you can do with a follow focus or something, you can do a manual adjustment in real time, and it's real easy to adjust from going inside to outside or changing if you actually wanted to do an aperture pull or that's
well, it's like a quick and dirty way also, like if you don't have a variable in D and you need to adjust, it's quick and dirty.
Do it. It's a really easy way. So I would say those are big difference, and then I'll let you kind of explain this is going to nerd out, and if you want to just
so when I started doing video, photo, whatever, it's always been aperture was shown off of an f-stop, right? And it wasn't until this past year and a half, 2 years, I actually really started thinking about cinema lenses, and I'm looking into it, and everything's t-stop. I'm like, what in the world? Is it just another?
Sure.
Is that like a more high-end way of saying f-stop? But it's super interesting. So f-stop is the way that f-stop is determined is the focal length divided by the circumference of the iris. At its widest setting, right? The problem with that, and you would think that if we have, so on this camera right here that Matt's angle, that's a 50 mil 1.4, and that's a Sigma Art f1.4. This is a Sony Zeiss Batis f1.4 50 mil.
planar, but
planar. Okay, so they're both the same. You would think that the light, like the exposure, if you had both cameras set the same ISO, the same shutter, the same aperture, you would think that the light transmittance would be the same. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily true.
Yeah.
Because of the number of elements.
Characteristics of the actual lens.
So what t-stop is if you take the f-stop and divide that by the square root of the light transmittance, the T actually stands for transmittance.
Okay, so
and it's actually
a universal measurement,
right? And it's actually like each lens is tested to get that number. It's not just let's do some quick math and this is a f1.4. It's tested
and for higher end lenses for the most part. That would all be
that way. It's universal, and so that if Matt and I are running a talking head video, and for some reason we're running 250 mils. We would want both of our lenses to have the same level of exposure under the same settings, right?
And that could even go, there's some changes, but that could even go 85 and 50 for the most part if it's a measurement of light.
Yeah, 35 and 50, whatever. Mm-hmm. Where if you use a correct cinema lens, you're going to get that.
Yeah.
Right.
And
So that's
we won't go into too much
geeky.
more
Yeah, you can go
detail.
more geeky if you want, but like that's
the big, those are the differences between cinema lenses overall. And there's not so much anymore. I will say, like, it's incredible what these companies are doing with, you're seeing more and more G Master lenses on cameras because of the ability of autofocus and some of those inside of video
really,
as well.
Like, honestly, now that there's the focus breathing compensation, we talked because we've been looking pretty hard into getting some kits.
Hardcore invest into cinema.
And once they had that, we're like,
I don't know. One day I will own some Supreme Primes from Zeiss. So, or some Cooks. I don't know. Again, talking 15 grand for a lens.
I think that's going to come with a step up of camera as well.
Yes. So, yeah, that's for me. That's a good overview. I know a lot of this stuff can be absolutely overwhelming as we're talking about these kind of things, but I think to kind of leave a couple things maybe is, in my opinion, lenses help tell the story. Like we use the word intentional. Like, you know, our lens choice should be intentional, not just like hope for the best. Like, you know, versatility for zooms. Like, that's why you use them. We didn't even get into some of these, you know, stupid wildlife long,
like a telephoto,
lens, you know, different things. But anyway, so zoom lenses, just versatility is the real reason I would choose one. Prime lenses, dynamic and very unique in each
and usually a little
way.
better quality. And
Yeah.
that's the thing with primes. And if you want primes, or if quality is most important to you, invest in primes. Don't
Especially
invest
low light. Low light, and just allows you to really get the most out of a situation. Anyway, I think that's probably what I would say the takeaway is. And part of that too is we'd love to hear if you guys have more questions, because really when I said all things lenses, there's so much more.
Yeah, we can go along. This would be a 17-hour podcast.
Well,
let Matt start on a rabbit trail and
when you start actually using definitions of these terms, and we didn't even touch telephoto lenses, and it's hard to even explain because of the definition alone. And so anyway, I would just say, yeah, that's the lenses that I you know, why we use them, what we use them for, and why we'll put random footage throughout this whole video. But yeah, overall, I think to me, that's why I continue to invest. I'll tell you right now, I'll go through 3 camera bodies before I'll ever go through a lens, because lenses are a much longer investment. And I would say, man, it's a good way to enhance your storytelling.
yeah, if you want to increase the quality of your video before you go and buy the biggest and greatest new camera and throw a junk lens on it, or even a mid-grade lens, and expect to have this great looking final product, it'd be better served. I think you've already said it. You'd be better served to buy a less expensive, less high-end camera and have great glass on the front than the other way around.
Technology changes all the time. Lenses, man, they're still, I mean, yes, they have some cool features to them, but overall, a high-quality lens is going to be a high-quality lens
last
for a long time.
Yeah. And I don't know. I think one thing I'm debating, like, if we should start making scenes to go in line with some of our topics that we could use to go over. So if that's something that you guys want, we'll think about it. Let us know. We'll think about
Well, we
it.
didn't, and again, we got to stop this thing, but we didn't even talk about like focal length relative to distance to faces and distortion. And like, we haven't even touched that. And that's why I'm like, we have to finish this thing today.
Yeah,
so,
we're already running longer than we wanted to. If we get on gear topics,
and we got on lenses because we thought lighting would take too long.
Ooh, yeah. So yeah, let's wrap this up. Like,
land the plane, Aaron.
Yeah, you land it, because I'm not going to be able to land it.
I just want to change subject.
So many.
You have a really cool shirt, dude.
Thanks, bro. I like yours too.
Yeah, well, mine's a little more
Mine's
plain,
cooler, but yeah,
legit.
yeah. Thanks, I appreciate it.
Oh, where's mine?
I don't know. It's still up there.
Sorry. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, you land it. I'm not going to be able to land this thing.
all I'd say is lenses will help you tell stories, be intentional about why you use them and what you use them for. And it's a good investment. I don't think you'll ever, regret investing in lenses. That's what I'd say.
And there's things there's topics and like you said, points that we haven't covered.
Dude,
if there are questions,
they kept like,
and they still are. Just, I think if you guys have any questions, man, hit us up. We'll do our best to answer maybe in the future.
Not episode 300. So we'll continue to go.
Yeah. We have plenty of more topics to cover, and if you have any ideas, hit us up.
Yeah.
All right.
And out.